It's incredibly important that we continue to talk about RFK Jr. and his views on autism when we're talking about things like the diabetes, especially when he continues to talk about autism in terms of a cure. We can't forget that he has agreed to follow the science and is ignoring most of the science that's out there. Thanks to a Biden-era rule, anything your tax dollars has gone to fund in terms of research, you should already have access to for free. Like the rest of the administration, he wants anything that's been doled out to be withdrawn and anything that's been paid out to be rescinded. Instead of focusing on building on research we already know about, he wants to bury anything that's out there and bring in new research that's already been completely discredited, just under a different name. So what does this have to do with autism? Despite what you may have heard, the comorbidities that go along with autism are not necessarily disabling, which is why a 2020 study wanted to know what was going on with autism and diabetes. But instead of starting an all-roads inquest into the things that we don't know about, the researchers started by looking at studies that touch on both autism and diabetes. The research said probably not. This paved the way for future researchers to look at the shortcomings from the other studies in order to come up with a better answer, which looks into the comorbidities that have already been identified as statistically significant as occurring with autism. Because one of the most important things to know are what the commonalities and common causes are to move forward. But due to a lack of standardization in approaching the subject because it hadn't previously been studied, the information was not there to be able to say something was statistically significantly true, leading them to conclude that a large population genetic study needed to be done to really understand the correlation. Just like with autism, the causes of diabetes are still being looked into. But one thing we know is that there is a huge genetic component to both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. For type 1 diabetes, it is an autoimmune cause, and for type 2, it's both environmental and genetic, but it is not autoimmune. He doesn't even go as far to say as that they're environmental. He says it's strictly controlled by diet, which then completely ignores the large and growing body of genetic information related to diabetes, which will then lead him to mislead others about what genetic cascades and RNA have to do with autism, especially since he plans to leave the most recent research into autism talking about how heritable or inherited autism can be. Because if he truly does believe that vaccines harm people and creates autism, he'll be able to say that in the interest of public health, people with autism are people who had vaccines, and people with vaccines have damaged DNA, and people with damaged DNA should not have children in the furtherance of the species.